Look at first. Let's just do a little bit of biographical information on Napoleon, and then we'll look at how he comes to basically rule the Directory, and then kind of sort of come to power. So the picture over here is Napoleon a little later. I'd say probably around 1805, and that's a very accurate portrait of him. This one is obviously him younger, and he did look different. That's him at about age 26. But this is your propaganda piece, right? That never happened. This is him crossing the Alps, and we'll talk about that, in order to invade Italy, which the Austrians held at that time. I know you can't really see it on here, but there are some names on these rocks that are meant to, put Napoleon in the same league as some other people. There's two names here. One is Hannibal, which, if you remember from World Civ I, was the Carthaginian who crossed the Alps and invaded Rome and almost took Rome, right? And the other one is Charlemagne. So this was an early portrait, and it's meant to sort of put Napoleon on that same league as the great generals of history. And of course, for the French, Charlemagne would be, if you were to tie yourself to someone like Charlemagne, it would be tying yourself to royalty, to great power. And this is that propaganda piece that Napoleon uses through imagery throughout his entire reign, right? So he was not on his beautiful white horse, which he did have this white horse. He was on an old mule, right, crossing the Alps. And I doubt he had those kind of clothes on. So, it's a propaganda piece. And Napoleon uses propaganda very, very successfully through his reign. Okay, so Napoleon was not born in France. He was born on an island called Corsica. In 1769. So he was exactly 20 years old when the French Revolution began. Corsica, if you don't know, is a little bit off the coast of southern France. There's two big islands there. There's Corsica on the north, and then there's another big island there called Sardinia. They're relatively close to Italy and France, so they're in the Mediterranean right there. Well, this island of Corsica was traditionally ruled by the Italians. Particularly the state of Genoa. Going back centuries. Okay, so if you were Corsican, you had much more in common with Italian people than you did French. All right. It's actually 1 year before Napoleon was born, in 1768, that Genoa sells Corsica to France, and Corsica becomes a little piece of France, right? That means, this is the story of Napoleon. He kind of in these certain places in history that make him who he is, right? So he's born into this world where everything before him, his parents, his grandparents, all have this vision of Corsica as relatively independent, but just an extension of Genoa, right? They don't speak French, they don't speak Italian. It's their own language. It's Corsican, right? But heavy Italian accent, right? So there's really nothing French about Napoleon or his family, nothing, right? But as I said, he's born right at the period where suddenly the Corsicans find themselves ruled by the French. And Napoleon, at an early age, learns to hate the French, right? He hates the French. He sees them as being, he says, the French were vomited upon our shores, right? He he hated them, and a lot of Corsicans did. Right? They want an independent Corsica, the way that it used to be. They certainly don't want it controlled by this great power, France. Being controlled by a little state like Genoa, very far away, is quite different than the great power of France. Right? So there's rebellion against the French in Corsica, right? When Napoleon's just a child. His parents, though, don't get involved in that because they kind of see the bigger picture, right? So in 1771, France decides, in order to kind of keep Corsicans, well, let's say sort of quell the rebellion, and then also bring Corsicans into the French world and culture, to try and bring them into the French Empire. We'll create a nobility in Corsica, right? This is the best way during this period to make people happy. You literally just invent a nobility. In 1771, that's what they do. So it's a Corsican nobility. They're not on the same level as, say, a French noble, but now they have a title, right? Now, again, you can have a title and be dirt poor, right? A title doesn't secure you wealth. So Napoleon grows up in sort of a middle upper class family that has a title, right? His parents are technically nobles only because France has given them that. And so they kind of have a view of, they're very for Corsican independence, but at the same time they recognize that France is giving them a way to move up in life through this nobility, right? So it gives Napoleon and his brothers and sisters, of which he had, I think, a total of 8, opportunities that a Corsican would have never had this event not happened, right? So, on the one hand, France is going to give Napoleon everything he needs to become Napoleon Bonaparte, okay? And at the same time, for a long time, he hates the French, okay? At a relatively young age, maybe 8 or 9 years old, he is given a scholarship. He's given that scholarship because his parents are nobility, this lower nobility. He actually wins this scholarship. So, and some of his brothers do as well. That's going to allow Napoleon to go to France and get an actual French education, right? He wins the scholarship, yes, based on the fact that he's sort of this noble, this Corsican noble, but also because he won it because he was intelligent and he won the scholarship, right? He was exceptional in mathematics. He had a great interest in some maybe possible future. One of his teachers noted in history and geography. So this was like a really intelligent little kid who, I'm sure when he was in Corsica, was just a little Corsican kid who fit in with his Corsican buddies. But now he goes to France, right? And that's going to be very different. I mean, it's like, I would say it would be almost like, I'm trying to think of like a modern example of somebody who grew up, in Hawaii here in the United States, which has its own little culture. It's an island out in the Pacific, coming to the United States at a relatively young age. You don't look the same. You know what I mean? It's just like coming into this world where you don't fit in, and so he was an outcast, right? Where he's sent to is actually a royal military school, So the royalty part tells you that every student in there is of noble blood, right? But he is the only little Corsican, right, there. Almost all the other students are of the great French nobility. This is their children, right? I mean, you can imagine how stuck up all of these kids would be, right? And they treat Napoleon like crap. One, he he doesn't have the same cultural mannerisms as they do. And the big thing is his language. He's still learning French. I mean, he's only 8 or 9 years old. He's trying to learn French. But even when he speaks French, he has a very thick Corsican Italian accent. And the kids just taunt him mercilessly about this. To them, he sounds like a poor farmer, right? And so he is, it's like the southern accent for people in southern France going to northern France. They make fun of them because of that accent. And so the French, we all know that the French are big on that. You're not speaking French correctly, right? So they taunt him, and that just makes him hate even more France, right? He does not like where he's at and what he's surrounded by. He does become an outcast, in which he has virtually no friends. And all of his friends become books, people who write. So his friends become Voltaire and Montesquieu and Rousseau through reading, right? So he's this really nerdy kid, basically, who reads prolifically, particularly the writers of the Enlightenment. Rousseau will be very influential for Napoleon. But he also reads history, military history, right? He begins to kind of form his own education, right? So yes, he's studying, and he does learn, the things that a student would learn. He learns, like I said, about the military because he's in this military college. The idea here is if he's going to make the cut, he would then go from this college to a big league military college, and then he could become an officer in the army, because remember, he's nobility. And before the French Revolution, the only way you can be an officer in any European army is if you're noble, right? So again, what the whole French takeover of Corsica gives him is an opportunity that he would have never had as a Corsican, right? So he was in the right place at the right time, and it won't be the last time that happens. Okay, so he, even though he was sort of a loner, he does exceptionally well in his studies there, and he gets sent then to the Royal Military Academy in Paris. This is a big deal. He's about 15 when he gets accepted. So this is the year, you don't have to know this year, but 1784. 1784, he goes to this great Royal Military Academy, where he's trained. What he wants to do is become an artillery officer, right? Cannons. France is at this time at the vanguard of a few military innovations. One, there was a military French military theorist named Vauban, who came up with, but he kind of mastered the art of siege warfare, right? Siege warfare is where you kind of surround your enemy in a town or city, and you bomb them with artillery, and you kind of surround them, and you just wait out until they surrender, until they start starving and they can't get out, right? And so that's a siege. It's different than a full battle, right? And Vauban came up with also great fortifications to protect the French against siege warfare. So he came up with something called the star fortification, of which you could then have these cannon pieces at each point of the star and a 360 protection of your fortification, which is
which can be seen in a lot of forts in America.
The American Revolution, because
what was his name? How do you spell his name?
Well, Vauban, V-A-N-B-A-U-N, something like that. But the person who brings that to the American Revolution was Lafayette, right? Lafayette brings those French ideas, and you're right. That's seen in the American Revolution. Okay, so this this sort of apprenticeship, however you want to put it, to become an artillery officer. So artillery is the other thing that the French are at the sort of vanguard of, which is to say they have the best artillery pieces in Europe. All right, what makes them so great? I mean, other countries have artillery pieces that are massive, that can knock down a fortification. The thing about the